Welcome back to this week's episodes of Politics in the Pulpit, a lectionary-based preaching resource designed to ask the provocative questions of how politics could appear in our preaching this week. My name is Clare Williams. I'm an associate speaker and tutor at OCCA, the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics, and I'm also doing my PhD in sociology. I'm so excited to be joined by our special guest today, Hannah Fremont-Brown. And to tell you a little bit about Hannah, she has a particular expertise in faith and social justice, and she does that by delivering through policy development, public affairs, and campaigning. She's worked with church and faith-based organizations, and she likes connecting people and making things possible, making things happen and working towards significant changes and transformation in our society. Would you say that's accurate, Hannah?
Oh, I hope so. You're probably better asking my colleagues, and particularly my colleagues in the JPIT team, who know me very well from working with them over the lots over the past few years. So I hope that's true. Um, and
Mhm.
yeah, sounds good to me.
And can you just tell us your full title at this point in time and what that entails?
Yeah, so at the moment, I'm working as I think my job title is the Anti-Poverty Movement Coordinator for the Methodist Church. But what that means in practice is I spend time coordinating the Let's End Poverty movement. So helping churches and charities and grassroots organisations think about how we amplify the need to end poverty in the public square, and kind of getting organised around the things we can do to make a difference.
Thank you for that. And I'm sure this is going to come to the fore in how we're looking at this week's passages. We're also joined by a lovely member of the JPIT team, and that's Roo Stewart. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do, Roo?
Hi there, I'm the head of public issues. I work with the United Reformed Church, so that's where I'm currently seated, and you can maybe tell by my lanyard as well. That's where I work, but a big part of my role is actually working ecumenically with my Methodist, Baptist, and Church of Scotland colleagues to try and pursue justice, to try and enable our churches to be speaking out and to take action for justice and peace. It's a huge responsibility. I really enjoy the fact that I get to talk about this stuff all day, every day. I love that we get to dive into the Bible and to find out what it says to guide us and to help us as we do that. And also just listening to the stories of people in our churches and our communities who are really responding to this. So I have a bit of a dream job, I have to say, because I just love that it's really tough. There's lots going on in the news. We'll talk about that in a second,
Mm,
probably, and sometimes it can really feel quite a burden for a lot of people who we care about this stuff. But to actually feel that we can make a difference, to feel that there's something that we can do, even if it's a small thing, but something that we can do or we can say, a change that we can make in the lives of someone or in someone's, that is enough to keep us going sometimes, even through those difficult and
mm,
dark places. So I really love and I really enjoy that, and love sharing the good news that people are sharing as well. So if people do have good news, tell us. We love to keep that news spreading, to keep that going, because we need that in difficult times. To keep us aware that things are changing and things are happening for the better, but also to be aware of the things which are challenging and tricky as well. So a lot of my job is trying to listen to those things and to
mm,
help people to respond to those. So
yeah.
it's a joy to do.
Holding those two things together, the
Mm.
fact that we're all invited to do something as well as not, not pretending that things aren't sometimes discouraging or disheartening. So thank you for that, Roo.
Yeah.
So as always, we like to think about what's coming up, I guess, in our global calendar. And we know that this coming week is Racial Justice Sunday on the 9th of February. The 20th of February is World Day of Social Justice. 28th of February is Rare Disease Day. And March will be bringing in Women's History Month. And also Zero Discrimination Day on the 1st of March. So lots of things there to talk about. And I just wonder as well if we might think as we approach today's passages, some of the latest news that's coming out of America with the deportations of um, well, what's been called illegal migrants. But I'm sure we can unpack that a little bit more. But to begin with, Hannah, do you mind just sharing with us? You're on the Politics in the Pulpit podcast. Are those two things in conflict? What are your thoughts about the phrase politics in the pulpit? Do they actually belong there?
Yeah, I mean, I feel really lucky that the faith tradition that I was raised in never questioned whether those two things went together. They always went hand in hand. It was, um, I wouldn't say I was ever sat down and told that those two things were important together, but I was shown it by the way that the church community that I was raised in lived out their faith. As often as we were getting involved with kind of worship and praise events, we were getting involved with campaigns. And some of my earliest memories of being with my church community are going out to big campaign rallies and taking part in fundraising around charity initiatives. So there's something that has always been present for me around how faith and politics interact. Um, I think for me, that's because I definitely see politics in that sense with the broadest definition of, how do we live well together? How do we organize our life together here on the earth as people who can live alongside one another as created by God, but also with creation? Um, Politics, at the most top level is about making sure that we can live well together. We might have different definitions of what that looks like in practice, but actually, as people of faith, we bring a sense of what the best way of living together, what right relationships looks like to our faith and to our politics. So I've never seen a separation between those things. And I think that's what's made me really passionate about being an advocate for social justice, but from the perspective of my faith. It matters to me that people know why I care about these issues, because actually that's the kind of the vision that I'm working towards comes from my faith.
Mm, mm. I like what you said there about living well together, because I think for some people, politics could just be living together. What does that look like to live together? And that could be the opposite of living well. So I think that the Christian faith calls us to live well together. What does that look like? Does it mean to give up power? Does it mean to accommodate the stranger? What does it mean? So our passages for today are from Isaiah 6. They are also from, sorry, just get my notes here. Isaiah 6, 1 Corinthians 15, Psalm 138, and Luke 5. 1 to 11. So I guess just let's open up with just thinking about some of the themes maybe that you've drawn out of those texts, and then we'll get into more specific parts of them. So I don't know, Roo, if you want to kick us off.
Okay, yeah, I mean, there's so much to pour into here. If I start with the Old Testament one just for a second, the Isaiah 6, that to me is a really familiar text. It may be for lots of people as well. I'm a musician, and there's quite a few songs have been written around those first few verses. So, as a musician, sometimes I could just like sing that to you. I could recite some of those words to you because the imagery is fantastic and really awesome and awe-inspiring. It's also quite beyond our own comprehension as well. So sometimes it's good to dwell in those moments, I think, just to, even as we begin to think about the practicalities of and the challenges of real life, to start from that awesome prophetic image of God as the one who's in control. Sometimes we just don't feel that. We don't feel at all. We say, why, God? Why are these happening? And actually later on in verse 11, there's that line, how long, O Lord? And I really hear that kind of pouring out of Isaiah, questioning, why must there be so much desolation? Why must this continue? But to see in those first few verses that image of God as the one who rules supreme, the one who's over all, the one whose glory fills the temple, the train of his robe, or the hem of his robe, as in one translation. I thought, just the hem? I think it's the whole train of it, filling the temple with glory, filling that place with glory. And I want to sit there just for a minute and not dismiss it just as some crazy image that we can't understand, but just to help us understand sometimes that God is far beyond and far above our own expectations and our own imagination sometimes impossible to describe. So my way in, I guess, is not to try and ignore passages like this, which don't seem very earthbound and don't seem very real and of this moment, but actually sometimes we just need to sit there and let that encourage us and amaze us, and to sit with awe, just as Isaiah sits with awe, and to just contemplate and imagine what the world would be like if we saw that reigning of God in every life and in everyone at all times. We don't see that all the time, but just to sit there and imagine it. That's where I would start, maybe, in those passages.
Thank you, Roo. I'm going to make an observation just in a moment, but Hannah, do you have anything you'd like to add, particularly about the Isaiah passage?
Yeah, I love that, Rue, and I think sometimes it's really tempting when there's this kind of otherworldly imagery in our Bible readings to just pick out the bits that feel familiar and to let those bits go, but to sit with them for a bit is a really good challenge. And I've been thinking a little bit about, if we go back to that sense that we are just talking about, that actually our faith gives us a different vision for what the world can be and what the world can look like, and we hold that against those really challenging circumstances that we're hearing a lot about at the moment. There feels like there is a lot of really challenging stuff going on in the world. Are there stories and moments and pictures in the Bible that we can just spend a bit of time with that remind us that God offers us something different? And I love the contradiction in two of our readings around that Isaiah reading, that it's big and spectacular and it's regal and it's dramatic. And that is an image that God gives us about what different could look like. And then in our gospel reading, the picture is more fish. Like, it's fishing, it's simple, it's very human, it's very it's about the stuff of everyday life. And that too has something in it of a vision of what different can be. So there are so many treasures about those different pictures and stories that we could just sit with and hold against what's going on in the world, to remind ourselves that actually we've been given the gift of a vision of something better and something different.
This idea that we can imagine differently because of the awe that we see in scripture sometimes. I think what you were saying there, what we both were saying there, particularly Rue, about the transcendence of God and just sitting in that awe. It reminds me of something that the agnostic historian Tom Holland, not Spider-Man, but the historian Tom Holland says, which is preach the weird stuff. In an interview with Glenn Scrivener, he talked about preaching the weird stuff because the Bible is full of, the Christian faith is full of the supernatural, it's full of the transcendent. And actually, Gen Z are currently very open to the spiritual at this point in time. And so maybe preaching the weird stuff or preaching the awe-inspiring stuff can actually reach the generation, Gen Z, where they are at this moment. Okay, I want to kind of, ask a bit more challenging question. What is the bad news in these passages that you might see there? It won't stay negative, but I just wanted to ask, what's the bad news?
I was really struck by the kind of second half of that Isaiah reading. And I know sometimes our lectionary doesn't always invite us to go into that second half. We might stop at the first bit, but that second half of the words that God gives, this is what I'm going to do. That's really it's quite scary and it's quite destructive and it feels quite angry. And my temptation is to skip over and avoid that bit. Like, maybe the lectionary's temptation is to do that as well, and it kind of cuts the reading off there because we don't know what to make of it. Um, and it's, I was comparing that again to that reading in the gospel where Jesus asks the disciples to do something differently. And it's all well and good saying, yeah, go on, I'll give that a try. If you're not quite sure what's going to happen, it feels quite harmless. You might just cast your net down and nothing comes back. But actually, what God's asking in that first reading, that Isaiah reading, is go out and carry this message that is full of anger and destruction and danger. That's a really scary message to be asked to carry by God. Can we still trust in that circumstance? I think I found that. I don't 100% know if that's bad news, but it's certainly difficult news.
Yeah, sitting in the discomfort of the passage. Yeah, Rue, sorry, I think you want to go ahead.
Well, I was just reflecting, as Hannah's been saying there about the challenge in that second half of Isaiah. And yeah, I would actually encourage people to really think about preaching from this. Our gospel readings of it is a really good one to go into, but thinking about the Isaiah one as well is really challenging, and it's challenged me as well. Thinking about in that sort of second part of the reading, how it says, the mind of the people would be dull, their ears would be stopped, their eyes would be shut. I just kind of think, wow, you know, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be that kind of person. And it's very easy to go and judge other people and start to point fingers and say, well, oh, their mind is dull. Their ears are
Mhm.
stopped. Their eyes have not been opened to what we know. If only they could be, then things would be different. That maybe is actually a place of hope for me sometimes whenever I see people who carry the name of Christ, who say they're Christians, yet pursue a very different way of life than what I would expect. And we see that perhaps in our news at the minute, of people who align themselves very strongly with a Christian faith, yet it doesn't seem to be good news. It seems to be bad news for a lot of people. And so I have to wrestle with that and say, why God, would these people who carry the name of Christ behave in this way? But then I have to look at myself, and I have to come back and remember, well, I have responsibility for myself. And I need to make sure that my eyes are constantly being opened and my ears are constantly unblocked. Am I attentive to the cries of those who are in need? Am I seeing what's behind the news headlines? What are the motivations of people? Perhaps what can I be thinking around there? So I find it really challenging in just those few verses to just go deeper and to say, not just pointing the finger out, but thinking of myself. Woe, woe, I'm a person of unclean lips, as Isaiah says, and to realize in that transcendence and to think about the world around us, how unclean or imperfect or how unlike the kingdom that Jesus describes for us things are, but to hold on to that hope that God is transcendent, God is over all, and God is in
Mm.
all. So yeah, just to flesh out that a little bit more, just and that same cry of how long, O
Mm.
Lord.
Mm. And that cry of how long is echoed, I think, in Psalm 13. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? Um, yeah, I think what you both were hinting at there is yes, it's bad news, or what seems or a hard message, shall we say, in the second part of Isaiah 6, but actually it invites us to do that internal work, do that internal reflection. So that in itself is actually turns around and becomes effectively a good news for us. So yeah, the next question would then be, what is the good news in this passage, or is there hope in the passage, in the passages, should I say, and maybe thinking about the New Testament ones as well.
There was a real resonance for me across all of the passages I think that we have in today's lectionary of um, seeing these moments of people doubting their capability of responding to God's call on their life. We see that in the Isaiah reading that, I'm unclean. How can I? And then again, Simon Peter in the gospel reading, how can I be worthy of following you? And yet the message in both of those, God turns and says, I see all of who you are, and I still call you. And I think that connects to what you were just saying as well, Roo, that um, we're asked to examine ourselves. We're asked to confront the things actually that make us feel unworthy. And there will be those things, especially when we come to justice issues, examine the ways that actually we have been complicit in upholding injustice. We haven't done all that we could to be and live out the love of God in the world. But God sees all of that. It's not in spite of that, it's holding all of that that God still chooses to call both in the Isaiah reading and in the gospel. And I think that's really good news. I was particularly reflecting as I was preparing on it's Racial Justice Sunday on the 9th of February, and the theme that the resources are focused around this year is a coat of many colors. It's celebrating the diversity and the value of diversity and everything that it brings. And I found myself kind of wrestling with that challenge that I want to be part of the celebration, but I also want to recognize how I'm part and have been part of the problem. And I want to confront my unworthiness of being part of the solution. And yet God still calls us. God still calls us to be part of the solution. And so for me, these passages helped me kind of just sit with that for a moment, the challenge um, of of confronting the bad stuff and being called into the good stuff too.
Yeah, I'll concur, Hannah. I'll pick up the Corinthians passage, 1 Corinthians 15. Um, it's the same thing as you were just saying. We've got here Paul saying in verse 9, I am the least of the apostles, unfit to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. And it's that same deal. It's someone who is kind of feeling like almost like they're excluding themselves a little bit. They're saying, I'm not fit to be there. Yet, before that, at the start of the chapter, it's such a clear message. He actually uses the words good news in this translation. He says, good news that I proclaim to you, and which you received, in which you also stand. And he's come to that point of realizing that he is part of this great crowd of people who are witnessing and proclaiming the good news of God. And verse 2, it's that classic famous little phrase there, which I love, through which also you are being saved. And I just love that phrase. I know that's our English way of saying it, but it's really, really good for me. It really excites me that we are being saved, that there's perhaps for some people they'll hold on to a moment in their lives, that moment, but there's continual sense of being reformed, remade, rescued, changed, and that's something which we continually enter into, and that's something that Paul really articulates as well. There was a point where he felt excluded, but he is becoming and growing and reaching closer and closer, but not quite there yet, to a point where God has destined him to be. Yeah, verse 2 in 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul talks about being saved. And I find that really important in my walk, in my Christian faith as well, that there's not just that one point of thinking, I'm saved, I'm in that place of safety, I'm in that place of rescue, but actually there's a continual process of conforming and reforming and becoming the person that I'm destined to be, the one that God has called me to be. And Paul very clearly owns that, saying he's the least of the apostles, he doesn't deserve it, yet he's able to articulate this growing faith, this changing faith, which just really excites me, and each of us can be on that same journey as well.
So I think what both of you are touching upon is this idea of internal transformation that comes about through hearing the good news in the text, sitting with the discomfort of those texts, but also being challenged by them to change. And I just wonder if we could just kind of slightly move from, um, what God has called us to do, and that's sort of our role in this kind of pursuit of justice. But how do the passages tackle like marginalization or power dynamics, those sorts of things, and what is God's heartbeat for justice in those passages?
I think one of the things I was reflecting on that kind of train of thought around these repeated characters in these passages confronting how they feel unworthy to be messengers of good news. Who do we not expect to be the messengers of good news? And therefore, who are we not listening to? Who might be bringing us good news? And I think there is something of justice in that, challenging us to think, where are we making presumptions, maybe about ourselves, but also about the value and the worthiness of others to be part of transformation. So much of what holds up injustice is that repeated emotion to kind of push people to the side and say, you're not worthy in this space. We don't want to listen to what you have to say. And so many of our stories about tackling injustice and tearing down those structures are where people had their voice heard from the experiences that they'd had from a place of being on the margins. Who who might we need to listen to today to confront that in the ways that we might be holding up injustice? Um, God says we're all worthy. So how, if we exercise that and if we live like that, where might we be turning to that we aren't at the moment?
Yeah, in the Luke passage again in chapter 5, I marked out verse 5. It's just great, I think. Master, we have worked all night long and have caught nothing. Yet if you say so, I will let down the nets. And it was just that realization that sometimes all hope is kind of lost, and we feel that there's nothing we can do in ourselves. And we've reached the end, we've reached the limit. This is it. There's no point in even trying to do something, to change things, to make things better, or to try and intervene, because we've worked all night long. We've literally given all of our time and our energy. We've given our money. We've given our concentration. We've given up so much because we really believe in something and we're pursuing it with our whole heart. Yet we've caught nothing. The fruit of it hasn't been there, and that can be so draining, and we kind of wonder, is there any point in continuing with this? But that kind of just that sense of obedience, sometimes we feel God has called us to this. We know that it's right, yet we've got to keep going with that. So extending that metaphor a little bit, and trying to hear that at the very end, you've kind of got this sense of they were astounded at the results of that. I think that one of the reasons why this passage is mentioned, and why this account is in the Gospels, is because it was rare. It didn't happen all the time. If this was a daily occurrence, I suppose they would have just thought, oh, it's another miraculous catch of fish. Great. We'll not record this one then. We've already got one in the book. So I don't expect this happens all the time. But I do expect that with that kind of pursuit of justice, that we will begin to see them. We might not see them all the time as much as we like, but there is that sense of pursuing and holding on to that is worth it, even though we might find that it's not quite getting where we want it to be. The verse 11, where when they had brought their boats to shore, they left everything and followed him. And that to me just reminds me again that sacrifice is worth it. Sometimes it feels like, oh, don't ask me to do one more thing. My name's already on 15 rotas at church. I really can't give my time to anything else. And sometimes we have to stop and we have to say no to things to keep ourselves right, to keep ourselves going. But that idea of leaving everything and thinking, what's important? What are the things that I really value? What are the things which will help get to the place that we want to be in? That's really important. I looked up the Greek to try and find out what left everything might have meant, and unfortunately it just means leave everything. But it's also got this nuance. I'm not a Greek scholar, but what I can read from other scholars is to leave everything also has this sense of release, to let go of some things, and also this sense of forgiveness as well. That some of those things in the past we just need to let go and forgive, and then follow God in those things. So, that might not be very practical for people, but there might be some people in our congregations who are really feeling that they're at the end of something, that they've been working so hard on something, and they're not seeing the fruit of it. They're feeling so frustrated. But in this passage, I find that kind of sense of hope, just to hold on, and maybe to forgive some of those things of the past, to release things, to depart from some things that are holding us back, and to just keep following and trusting God, that God knows where the miraculous catch of fish is. And sometimes we just need to wait for that instruction, and we'll see something happen.
He does. He knows. I love that last phrase you said, that he knows about the miraculous catch of fish. And as you were talking there about this idea of, we've done everything. I've tried everything. It kind of reminds me of thinking about Racial Justice Sunday, Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail, which is often not quoted. His "I Have a Dream" speech is often quoted in discussions around race and reconciliation. But the letter from a Birmingham jail is this despairing letter. Like, I've tried, I'm tearing my hair out here to try and get the message of equality, racial equality and justice out there, but it's not happening. And you can really read the despair. I've done everything, but who would have known? In those moments, he would not have known the legacy that he would have left upon this movement. So a real live encouragement there for us, given some of the themes for the coming week. We're going to be bringing things to land shortly, but I just wanted, Hannah, someone's sitting at home right now looking at the lectionary passages. They're thinking, how am I going to put my preach together for Sunday? And we've all shared some, I say we, you both have shared some fantastic ideas, but in terms of the passages, where would you suggest we start first, or yeah, kind of lift off our preach for the week? Really practical ways or practical way in.
Yeah, I've been really struck by our conversation, the power of putting myself in the place of some of the people in these stories. When do I feel that feeling? And therefore, what is this story speaking to me in the moment that I'm in here? When am I feeling those moments of despair? Am I feeling that sense of I'm pushing at the door and it's not opening, and then my energy is running dry? And I wonder, I think sometimes we kind of follow the standard format of like, we'll read out the stories and then somebody will talk about them. But is there a starting point we can use here of inviting people to imagine themselves in one of these stories? Can I imagine myself sat in the boat, being asked to put the nets on the other side? And what might my brain be doing there? What might I be thinking? Where's my skepticism? How's my energy levels? And actually, just can we find some more creative ways of helping to immerse ourselves in that story that might open up something that feels very visceral and very real for us as we encounter them? I think I've really valued thinking like that in our conversation today. So I wonder if that might be a good place to start.
Roo, any further thoughts?
We haven't mentioned the psalm really, Psalm 138, and I just wanted to bring that in. And obviously, there's a reason why this psalm has been placed in this collection of passages for this Sunday, and I think the verse that springs out is verse 6. So verse 6 is, "For though the Lord is high," and that's referring back again to our Isaiah 6 passage, uh, he regards the lowly, but the haughty he perceives from far away. And, all of us would immediately perhaps think of, oh, that sounds a little bit like Mary's song, the Magnificat in Luke 1. And that idea of how God is attentive to those who are lowly, those who are in need, not the proud and the puffed up, but God hears the voices of even the ones that are ignored by the rest of society, the ones who don't feel they have anything to contribute or to say, the ones who are meek, the ones who are weak. And God hears and observes those. I love the hope in that psalm that even the smallest, quietest voice is heard and God hears it. So I think, for me, I want to sort of acknowledge that, wherever people are at, God's ear is big enough to hear even the quietest cry for help. But just to be careful, the haughty he perceives from far away. So just be careful. What's our attitude to others? How are we viewing others? Do we have any haughtiness or any pride built up in us? Just to be careful of that and just to be mindful of that and offer that back to God to say, help me to be attentive like God is to the cries of the weak and the lowly.
I think that's a real way to put ourselves in the passages Hannah was suggesting there. You know, the person who feels like, I'm crying out to God, but he doesn't hear me. But then also, I don't want to become the pride. I don't want to become full of pride. Don't want to become the proud person. A little bit like the two brothers in the parable of the. I was going to say the Samaritan, but not the Samaritan, but the parable of the son, the prodigal son, and how the older brother was like, he's got this sense of duty and feeling like, full of pride, essentially. So thank you both. I think it's been a very interesting conversation, particularly around this idea of where we position ourselves in these passages. I think that's going to be really helpful for someone as we look into preparing our messages. And I just wonder if at this point it might be helpful, Hannah, for you to end with a prayer, and then I will kind of lead us out, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's pray. God, we thank you that in all of your might and awe and majesty, even though you're cloak spreads across the heavens, you are still with us in the boat, asking us to cast our nets on the other side and inviting us to trust that you will do a new thing, even when we see no way ahead. That you know that the great catch of fish is coming. As we hold these readings from the Bible before our congregations and communities this week, God, I ask that you would speak to us afresh. Would you help us hear your voice and your call to justice, that we might go out better able to be your light and love in the world. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Hannah and Roo, and thank you for those of you who've been tuning in this week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcast and share with your friends. We also have online spaces for further engagement and discussion about faith and politics on X, Twitter, at Public Issues, or using hashtag politics in the pulpit. We have a Facebook group as well, which you can access through the Joint Public Issues Team's Facebook page and the website jpit.uk, jpit.uk. Thank you so much for joining us, and we're looking forward to being with you again for next week's passages.